one afternoon when I was flying from the carrier back to the Philippines, but we came into Da Nang, the airport there, and then refueled and got some stuff and then flew over to the Philippines. So I guess you can say I did go to Vietnam, but anyway, my service was mostly out there and, you know, looking at the waves and things. Yeah. So, and I also, you know, spent 13 months in Korea with the, on the Armistice Commission staff there, and did make a number of trips. Well, I was called the Chinese language officer with the UN command there, so I went up to Panmunjom a couple times a week, and we had meetings. It was called, well, one of the meetings was the language meeting, where we had to meet with a couple of Chinese People's Volunteers officers, you know, to go over the minutes for what was called the Neutral Nation Supervisory Commission, which you know, consisted of Switzerland and Czechoslovakia and Sweden and so on. And so that was my first, let's say, engagement with Chinese military officers from, you know, from Communist China. Was back at that time, and then I went to graduate school. I decided, you know, after 5 years of active duty, I'll put military service behind me, and I went to graduate school and other things, and I ended up the last 33 years of service or work was 33 years of teaching military history at the Army Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth. And so during that time, I did have you know, opportunity to do research on the Chinese military history in China, and I went to a lot of different events in China, and I didn't think about this until I was looking at this when I was asked by Mike Fellows to send a picture that you could put on the little flyer. I did a selfie. And anyway, here's my selfie that I did last week, and I just noticed now in the background, you can see there's some Chinese writing, and the character that's most obvious is the character is on the board right here, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But that little banner there with all the Chinese writing on it. I attended one of the first conferences that they had at the Academy of Military Science in Beijing on Sun Tzu or Sun Tzu, this military strategist from like a 500 BC who wrote this book that has been translated. A Marine General, Samuel Griffiths, did a great translation of it, the Griffiths translation of that book. So I'm at this conference, and we went to this one place where they said, would you like to have calligraphy of any passage in the Sun Tzu or Sun Tzu Art of War? And I said, well, how about could I just have, you know, we had this great calligrapher doing things, and I said, I'd like to have the 5 qualifications that the general should have according to Sun Tzu. So there are 5 characters there, and they did this and wrote them out. And one of the characters is this one. And let me just, maybe to get you kind of thinking about how do the Chinese think, or what's the Chinese language. When you think about China and how they're dealing with us and approaching us, well, there's a Chinese perspective on things. And that perspective has a lot of historical roots that go back thousands of years into the formation of their culture. And so here in the Sun Tzu Art of War, the first quality that the general is supposed to have is wisdom or intelligence. That's what the first thing that's listed. And this is the character for that. And I just wanted to explain, okay, how do Chinese, when you think about the development of a writing system, you know, to express concepts, ideas, and describe things. So this character, this is the ancient form of it, and maybe you can see this looks like an arrow, and this would be the mouth. And to know in Chinese, you just have, it would be just this character, which would be the arrow and the mouth, with the idea that if you know something, what comes out of your mouth is like an arrow hitting the target. In other words, you know what you're talking about. And then you put a sun underneath it, and that's how they would have written the sun, you know, like 1,000 years before Christ, a circle with a dot. So you put the sun in there, and then you've got this idea of you know things over time, you know, and if you know things over time, well, you must be intelligent, and maybe you're wise also. So this is wisdom. And so that's the first quality that the general should have, or the commander of the army. This is the title of the first chapter in that book, of the Swims the Art of War. And it is planning. It means planning and to thinking about things. And what does and when we think about planning, this is, again, the mouth. These are things supposedly coming out of the mouth. So this by itself is a character that just means to speak. A different word, you know, to speak. And this is the character by itself for 10. And in our number system, just like in the Chinese number system, just like ours, 10 is the highest number that basically includes all the others below, because when you get to 10, we just start adding on to 10. So 11 is 10 plus 1, 12 is 10 plus 2, you know, and then we go to like 20. 22 is actually, you know, it's all, you know, it's just 2 tens plus 2. So this 10 also has the meaning of, if you think, the center and the 4 compass points. The center and the 4 compass points to mean everything. You include everything in it. So if you think about planning, it's really discussing everything as we try to, you know, come up with an understanding of the reality we face. And I just thought, since that character was up there, I didn't really realize it until just now. But I thought, if we're talking about, you know, Chinese characters and how you think, or how they would develop a language, this is a character that means man. And if you can imagine, this is what's called a standing man, and with the one leg longer than the other. But the original, the Chinese character for man is basically just these two things coming up, and then this would be the body. So if you think of, okay, here I am, here's my body up here, and my 2 legs like this. So if you can imagine this, these are the legs, and this is the body up here. And this then, as I remember I said spoken word, is that this character, if you think of the spoken word, and here's a standing man. And you put those together, and what would you think in terms of the meaning of that character?
Well, communicating. Wise man.
Well, it actually is. It's translated as, you know, you say if someone is standing by their word is the actual, very literal sense here. That the person is standing, and here's what he's saying. So a person who stands by their word, it's translated as the general should be sincere or faithful, or basically he should stand by his word, you know. And so that's the thinking of things. So there's a lot of thought that goes in to the way Chinese is written, and the thought process that go into it. Yeah.
Does that include honesty?
Yes. That's yeah. There's a number of, you know, when you think of how the meanings of words have extended meanings, and so like you say, we could say, okay, sincere, honest, you know, faithful, you know, trustworthy. All of those things are associated with someone who stands by their word, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's, yeah. So I just thought I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the ideas without getting into Chinese characters. But so Sun Tzu is, 500 BC. He's writing about what should generals do, what do commanders need to do, what should the kings do, because 500 BC, China is divided up into a whole bunch of little states, and they're fighting each other. There's a lot of wars going on. And Sun Tzu is one of these guys who was going around to the different kings and saying, I got some great ideas. And he even has one passage, if you listen to my ideas, sir, king, you're going to win your next war. And one of his ideas that I think it goes right down to the present in terms of understanding Chinese thought or Chinese behavior, and that is avoid, if you're attacking, you want to avoid strength or avoid substance, avoid something that's there, and attack weakness or attack emptiness. And I think if we look at what the Chinese have been doing, that we're dealing with today, you can really see this idea of they will avoid strength, they will avoid a real serious block, but they'll attack weakness. And that gets into another real important part of the Sun Tzu, where he's saying war is deception. Fundamentally, war is about lying or hiding your strength while making the enemy think something different. So he has quite a long list of things to deceive the enemy. Appear incapable when you're capable, or when you're incapable, appear capable. When you're near, appear that you're a long ways away, or when you're a long ways away, make the enemy think you're close. So all this idea of deception, deceive the enemy, so they can't get a clear picture of reality. And we talk about the importance of intelligence. We got all these great systems out there. How are we going to know what the enemy can do and all of that? And this idea of in the Army, maybe you've heard this, the search for information dominance. The idea that we're going to know everything, the enemy's not going to know everything. That's going to give us a big advantage. And the problem with that is, some of you maybe might even, I don't know if did anybody ever go to Army CGSC? Oh my gosh, no one had that great experience. Okay, well, sorry about that for you all, but but anyway, we had a lesson on military theorists that included study of a man named Clausewitz, and he had written a book called On War, and one of the things he says, war most resembles a game of cards. And why is that? Because we can't be certain. We're dealing with probabilities, and we're dealing with chance. And so that throws everything into this realm of guesswork or whatever, and you just kind of have to deal with what comes your way. You can't be sure of anything in warfare. And if you think that you've got everything nailed down, you may be setting yourself up for a big failure. So that's where Sun Tzu wants people to be thinking about the probabilities here, and he would his, let's say, assessment was attack weakness, attack emptiness. That's where you can get the biggest advantage with the least possibility of something going wrong. In fact, he makes a point about, you really, it's good not to get involved in positional warfare. Is that you want to keep freedom of maneuver and be able to then attack, where the enemy is weak, so you can create opportunities. So looking at where we are today, then, in terms of Chinese strategy as we see it, I passed out Maureen and some others have helped put out some maps on the on your chair. And I just wanted to briefly explain what I'd like to do with these maps. Is that you can see there's one with a lot of color on it, and that's the South China Sea. Yeah, and you can see the so you got Vietnam. There's our Vietnam War Symposium. It'll be all about Vietnam. And then you've got the Philippines, and you can see the line, like they've got what they call exclusive economic zone lines. So according to the law of the sea, that countries have an exclusive economic zone that runs 200 miles out from their territory. So you can see where the Philippine exclusive economic zone is, and then Vietnam exclusive economic zone, and so on. And then Malaysia has its claims, Brunei, even Indonesia has some claims going up in there, that area between, well, you can see Indonesia is just right below Brunei there. The state of Indonesia is mentioned. So you've got all of these different countries with their exclusive economic zones, and there wouldn't be very much in the middle of the South China Sea left over. However, you can see that 9-dash line. That's what the Chinese, they just put 9 dashes on the line and say, everything inside this line belongs to us, and it's our territory. It's our nobody else can go in there. And so, and you can see there's Second Thomas Shoal there. Pretty close to that one Filipino island, that's the Palawan Island. And it's not on the map, but just even closer to the Philippine island is another small shoal. And there's been a lot of contest between the Chinese and the Filipinos the last few months, where they have been using water cannon, and even we had, you might have seen, there was a 60-minute crew was even out on that one ship that the Chinese rammed and just punched a hole in the hull. Fortunately, it was above the water line. Otherwise, there could have been, some serious, casualties if the ship had sunk. Yes.
Is that Scarborough Shoals that you're talking about?
No, it's Benina. I think it's Benina Shoal, something like that. Yes, but yeah, Scarborough Shoals is. It's not on here, but that's another, point of contention, right? Yes, yeah. So, so what the Chinese have done then is, establish. You could say, well, we are going into emptiness. Who's going to bother us? And if you go back to a few years ago, there was no Chinese presence in much of that within the 9-dash lines. What they did is find some of these shoals and then just bring in soil or bring in well, dirt, rocks, whatever, and also dredge up a lot of debris or land or dirt, rocks from the seabed and pile it up and create islands. And so now they've actually got large air bases in the South China Sea, and their Coast Guard is harassing any ships that go in to that 9-dash line, because now they've passed laws that that's their sovereign territory, and anyone that enters it really is violating their sovereignty. So here you had this this situation that has developed into a serious problem for the U.S. Why? Why is it a big problem for us? Because we've got a mutual defense treaty with the Filipinos, and we're saying those shoals, areas within the exclusive economic zone line, and even like the Filipino Coast Guard ships. That ship that had the hole punched in it, the U.S. is saying that ship was covered under our mutual defense treaty. It really was a violation that we're concerned about. Will this escalate further? Who knows? But certainly the potential exists there in the South China Sea then for greater, if we talk about competition, or just put confrontation up there, and it could escalate from confrontation to actual conflict, hostilities. And just to go back to what Clausewitz, the guy I mentioned, said, he said war is an act of force to bend the enemy to your will. Now, is punching a hole in the hull of your ship, is that an act of force? I know I'd feel like someone had committed an act of force against me, but yes.
What about the international courts that ruled China was in violation with that 9-.
Yes, yes. So the Filipinos back, I think it was 2012, filed, there's a International Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Filipinos file a case against the Chinese, say they're violating, law of the sea and things. And in 2016 then, that court ruled in favor of the Philippines and said all of those artificial islands that the Chinese built, they have no legal standing. And the Chinese response is, hey, the ruling of that arbitration court is just a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything. What does mean something? Force, physical presence. We got more force there than the Philippines do. Well, they better listen to us. I mean, that's basically their position. Yeah. So what's going to happen down the road? I mean, the Filipinos, it's kind of interesting that it was just last month, I guess. I think Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Defense Austin did go to Manila and met with President Marcos and pledged another $500 million of U.S. aid to the Filipino Defense Fund. So we're trying to strengthen the Filipinos, and we've had responding in several ways over the last couple of years. We've got, I think the Filipinos gave us 5 more bases, and when we had a big exercise with the Filipino military a few months ago, we had this long-range or intermediate-range missile system that was brought in, and we've left it there after the exercise, so that's a message. And also the Filipinos, you might be interested in this. I didn't know this until I started looking into this, but the Filipinos recently bought an anti-ship missile system from India. So they and the Indians, they have quite an arms industry, and so they sold this missile system to the Filipinos, anti-ship missile system. Who would the Filipinos possibly be shooting at? The Chinese. So the Chinese protested to the Russians because 15% of the missile components are from Russia. It's kind of a joint Indian-Russian defense program. I mean, the Indian defense system and the Russian defense system are pretty closely linked. I think India probably has, what percentage of their armaments are from Russia, but it's big. And I think that explains a lot behind why they haven't been more forceful in condemning the Russian aggression against Ukraine, because they've had this goes way back to the 50s, that India, when they become independent, they look to Russia as kind of the country that they're going to have a close relationship with, and so through the years they have purchased a lot of Russian equipment, and that's one thing maybe that's helped now that some of their decisions, they're kind of going away from buying Russian equipment, because the Russian equipment has been shown by the Ukrainians to have some defects, But anyway, the So the Chinese protested to the Russians about this, and the Russians said, no, it doesn't matter. We're sorry, but we're going to approve the Indian sale of this, these missiles to the Philippines. Now remember, when we had this case in this country of the British Prime Minister came over here a few weeks ago and was begging President Biden to give him permission to give the long-range missiles to Ukraine, so Ukraine could fire on some of these Russian air bases that are being used to attack Ukraine. What was President Biden's answer? Yeah. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. So here the British, you look at the Russian-Indian relationship, the Russians had 15% of the parts in the missile. They said, okay, we've got a few, percentage of the parts in the missiles that the British have. We're saying, oh no, can't do that. It's too dangerous. Which gets back, I think, let me just kind of take a little short detour here and talk again about this attacking emptiness. Is that it's not just the emptiness with this physical space, but wars are fought by human beings, and Sun Tzu and the Chinese military strategists through the centuries have always been very focused on human psychology and the psychology of the generals. And one of the things, we're talking about war is deception. Sun Tzu says, if a general is easily angered, irritate him. Why would you want to irritate a general who is easily angered?
Provoke.
Yeah. Well, you create psychological imbalance there. He's going to start, his anger is going to start interfering with his rational thinking. And so Sun Tzu even has he says, the best thing to do is you attack the enemy plans. Attack his strategy. If you get into a big fight, especially a fight against the walled cities that you might have to lay siege to, you don't want to do that, because the general, as the siege goes on and he doesn't succeed, he becomes more and more impatient. And if you become impatient, you lose your psychological balance. Sun Tzu says the general, he'll become impatient, he'll order an attack, the attack will fail, he'll have lost a third of his troops, and it was a disaster. So you mean that kind of thing. In fact, you go back to when the Chinese write about the Korean War, one of the things you'll often see at a certain point, when they're talking about General MacArthur, they say, here's a guy, very arrogant. He thought he knew everything, okay? So let's encourage his arrogance and encourage him to launch that end the war offensive, in 1950. And so MacArthur says, yeah, we can end this war by Christmas. We'll have the troops home by Christmas, and I can lead the victory parade in Washington, right? They launched that offensive, and it's a disaster. The Marines were lucky to get out. Those that got out alive were lucky to get out alive. And the 2nd Division in the 8th Army had to run like heck, and the Chinese we could have caught them all, but they were in trucks and we couldn't run that fast. I mean, it was a disaster because again, I think you could say people thinking that I know what's right and I'm impatient. We're going to end this, and and you end up with mistakes being made. So thinking about emptiness up here, here's that they can look at that and say, well, where are we? I've got a little. This was Senator John McCain. You might remember Senator McCain. This was an op-ed he wrote in 2016 when he was talking about the situation in the South China Sea. And he's saying here, he begins by quoting Admiral Harry Harris, who at that time was commander of U.S. Pacific Command. And he says, here's what General Harris told us. General Harris said, China is clearly militarizing the South China Sea, and you'd have to believe in the first Earth, in the flat Earth, to think otherwise. And then, Senator McCain goes on, he says, but despite the Obama administration's 3 no's, and so what would be the 3 no's? Obama is saying, okay, no reclamation of land, okay. No militarization and no coercion, no use of coercion. And that's what, those were the 3 no's of Obama to the Chinese. Don't do this. And then McCain says, despite, the president saying this, Beijing has pressed forward with all 3. And that's exactly what happened. And so McCain is saying, the administration's aversion to risk has resulted in a policy that has failed to deter China's pursuit of maritime hegemony while confusing and alarming America's regional allies and partners. So what do we see here? If we go back to Sun Tzu, remember Sun Tzu saying, attack weakness, avoid strength, okay? What did the Chinese see when they looked at Obama? An empty suit, okay? What do they see now when they look at Biden? An empty suit. So it's easy to attack an empty suit. You don't have to count on getting a lot of pushback. And it was interesting, I read an article, this appeared back in 2021, just before the, well, it was just after the election. So this is March, April 2021 issue. So Biden has just taken office, and there's this man, well, the headline up here is How America and China Can Avoid War. And was written by Kevin Rudd, who had started out as a career as an Australian diplomat stationed in Beijing. Later, he became Australian Foreign Minister, Australian Prime Minister, and now he's the Australian ambassador to the U.S. So he has a lot of ideas about China and personal experience, I'm sure. I mean, as Australian Prime Minister, who knows? I mean, he might have actually met Xi Jinping or certainly some high-level Chinese figures. So anyway, he's appealing, writes here, Biden and Obama, or no, Biden and Xi, I wish, in order to avoid this confrontation or competition escalating into hostilities, to negotiate some limits, some guardrails to their behavior. And he writes in here that the Chinese are very surprised through the years that there wasn't much pushback to what they were doing. And that's what McCain is complaining about here. There's no pushback. The Chinese are attacking emptiness, and they're getting through. So that's kind of yes.
But doesn't that really go back even further in 1991 when fall of the Soviet Union and the Filipinos kicked the U.S. out of Clark,
Yeah.
Subic Bay. So now there's no presence there. If attacking emptiness or attacking weakness, seems like it goes back even further.
Well, yeah. What happened, I think. Okay, so the Philippine-U.S. relationship is pretty complicated. I mean, after we took, we defeated the Spanish in the Spanish-American War, and then we decide, oh, these Filipinos that want independence after Spain has been defeated, no, forget them. We want to control the Philippines. So we have a big war against the Filipinos. And so especially that President Duterte, being from the South, where a lot of the resistance to the Americans stayed the longest, is that there were a lot of those people, when he became president, he kind of took an anti-American position. But he's gone now. He's been gone for 2 years, and the new president now has basically a let's get closer to America policy. And so that's why we've got the 5 new bases and all of this stuff going on. The damage was done, but I think efforts are being made to, let's say, rebuild some bridges that were destroyed. And I think President Marcos is he may, well, and his defense minister too, I mean, they're taking a more aggressive position now against China than we want them to take, because,
Which is too bad.
which is too bad. Yeah, because we're concerned about a war with China, period. So here we are in the South China Sea then, you can say, trying to reestablish some level of stability or deterrence and things. And then you can, let me just go up here to the East China Sea. And you have another map that, that just shows Taiwan, and then you've got, here's Japan up here in the Okinawa, Ryukyu chain. And so the Chinese have been pushing very hard.
Your maps, let me pull them up.
Yeah, the Chinese have been pushing very hard against Japan, and you can see where that the Senkaku Islands regularly. The Chinese are encircling those islands and trying to act as if they are going to land or something like that. The Senkaku Islands are not inhabited. They're just, when you look at them, they stick up quite a ways, but they're not very large, and nobody lives on them, permanently.
And they were like this one.
Yeah,
There,
yeah. You can advance to either of those three.
Oh, okay,
By using
okay.
that.
Oh, okay. Wow, technology. Yeah,
Here, come a little forward and you can see what you're doing.
yeah. Okay, so so you can see on here where Okinawa is. And maybe some of you have been to Okinawa. I stopped there one day. Yeah. So the Japanese are very concerned about the Chinese growth of military power here in their area, and the Chinese have been using their Coast Guard as instead of their Navy to really put pressure on the Japanese in this area, and that involves even fishermen and things like that. But the Japanese response has been, I guess, as strong as it can be. Our response has been to say that Senkaku Islands still considered, Japanese territory, and even though the Chinese claim it, and these other islands then, the Chinese have been going through, different, I guess you'd call them passages or straits between the different islands, again as a way to provoke, the Japanese and make them feel uneasy. So the Chinese or the Japanese in 2019 they put a missile base on this island, Miyako Island. In 2023 they put a missile base on this island, and right now they're putting an electronic warfare base out here on this island, and for jamming and communications intelligence and so on. And this island is so close to Taiwan that on clear days you can stand there and see the mountaintops on Taiwan, because Taiwan has that mountain chain in the east that's over 10,000 feet high. So the Japanese are very concerned then about what's going to happen with Taiwan. And they're very concerned about what's going to happen to themselves. So they've even now started to, there's an island up in here where they're moving their reserve stocks of ammunition and building bases or places to store fuel up here north of the main Okinawa island here, so that in case there's some trouble down here, the ammunition and the fuel is closer at hand. As of, well, what they've been doing is keeping most of that stuff up on Hokkaido Island, which is way up to the north. So they're repositioning, plus they're making more agreements with the U.S. For enhanced cooperation between the Japanese self-defense force and the U.S. Navy and military. I mean, we have, as you know, a large naval force deployed in Japan. Yes.
So what I hear you saying is that part of their deception would be to have Coast Guard cutters of 13,000 tons. They're larger than a lot of our destroyers and frigates. But I thought very interesting what you said about their long-range view of things, that they created a cultural center to help people understand that Okinawa really isn't Japanese. That they have prepared to undermine the whole idea that it's an independent, that make it an independent country to undermine Japanese influence over Okinawa.
Yeah. And did everybody hear what Don said? Yeah. This is something recent. I think it was just last month. Xi Jinping announces China is going to set up what he called a Ryukyu. Now Ryukyu is, the island chain. The Ryukyu Island Research Center up in northeast China to study the historical relationship between what at one point I guess was a kingdom here with the capital in Naha, and their relationship with the Chinese emperors in Beijing. And yes, as I understand it, there was a relationship. The king of Okinawa would send gifts to the Chinese emperor, and the Chinese emperor would respond with gifts. Now, does that mean that maybe China has some claim then to Okinawa, or that Japan doesn't? I mean, these islands didn't become part of Japan until the 1870s, but Japanese military or history is pretty complicated too, because you had all these feudal states, and it wasn't until you had something called the Meiji Restoration around mid-century in the the 19th century, where the Japanese all these feudal lords, all the samurai, agreed there is only one Japanese emperor, and he lives in Tokyo, and we will accept him as our national leader. And then you had, once Japan really got fully unified like that, you had a tremendous increase in economic development. They brought in all these industries from outside, and it wasn't very long, 1904, 1905, they defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. So Japan very quickly rose from just kind of hoping to keep a closed-door policy of keeping the foreigners out to become very much a part of the international community and building up its national strength. And to some extent, the Chinese used the Japanese experience as a model, and that's why you get Chinese rapid economic development. They sent out hundreds of thousands of students, to bring back knowledge and expertise to China. Plus, then all the espionage activities and what they were able to somehow hack into some computer system with one of our aerospace firms and steal the F-35 plans and all of that. So China, when you think of where they came, I mean, the first time I went to China was 1982. Beijing was a dark city. There were hardly any cars. Everybody was riding to work on bicycles. You go over there now, I mean, it's changed. But how could it have changed so rapidly? Is a lot of intent was put into changing the Chinese economy, and they've done it. Yeah.
So Gary, we're not going to be able to exhaust your understanding, but there's a couple things you said about the very over-the-horizon thinking of China that really found interesting. So the Belts and Roads program is a very interesting thing in many different ways. Yup, it's an economic development thing. It's a way of telling other places that we want to support you economically. It's also defense in depth. They've created a lot of ways to get supplied in case they get into combat. But the thing that you said to me that was really interesting is this guy that said, take Mao's thinking about the countryside, lays siege to the cities. And then says that Europe, Western Europe, and North America are the cities. What China has to do is to look at South America, Asia, and Africa as the countryside, bring them over to our side, then we will prevail.
Yes, yes, okay. Did you all hear that? Yeah, what Don is talking about is back in this would have been 1965. Okay, 1965, so we're 20 years after the Japanese surrender. And you have this man named Lin Biao. Lin Biao at one point was named as Mao Zedong's successor. Unfortunately, he got overly ambitious and then he was suspected of being a traitor, trying to seize power himself. He tried to flee to the Soviet Union and his airplane got shot down. So that's what happened eventually to Lin Biao. But when he was speaking in 1965 on the 20th anniversary of the Japanese surrender, he was the defense minister of China. And so he gave this speech on long live the People's War. And so 1965, the Vietnam War for the U.S. is just starting to intensify in 1965. And so he had this speech, long live victory of the People's War. And he said, Mao Zedong's a great thinker, a great military thinker, and his idea of winning the Civil War was, we have guerrillas in the countryside, we capture the countryside, we surround the cities, and then the cities have to fall because we've surrounded them and they have no way to continue. Yes, sir?
That's a current PLA military tactics follow the exact same strategy where they will infiltrate countrysides, or if you have patrol bases or operation centers throughout an area theater, they will go and attack the weaker platoons that are isolated out your recon elements to then isolate those recon elements from the main force, and then at that point go around to attack the main force. So if you have an armored brigade combat team operating in the region, they'll go attack the lighter infantry elements on the side that are less connected, or try to hit the artillery support in the rear, to then isolate the command and control headquarters and take it out. That's their main way. So fighting under Chinese tactics.
Current doctrine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much focused on the countryside as Mao saw it as a way to win the Chinese Civil War. That theory has progressed forward to how the Chinese are thinking of currently fighting. However, not been tested, and the last time China's had a military operation was in the late 1970s when they invaded Vietnam rather unsuccessfully. However, that's still their main current approach. Chinese fighting under Maoist principles or under Chinese principles is how they rationalize isolation, infiltration, and then destruction.
Right, yeah, thank you. I mean, and that's very good. So looking at what what Don was saying, and adding to then what you said, is that this Lin Biao, he said, okay, this was the Chinese strategy for winning the Chinese Civil War. As we use this idea of capturing the countryside, attacking the weakness surrounding the cities. He says, now, in our present time, this is how we're going to approach the world, the whole world. The cities of the world are North America and Europe. And so how do we want to attack them? We want to gain control and influence over the countryside of the world, which is Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And once we get control of that, then the cities are going to be in a weak spot, let's say a world of hurt or a weak spot, and we'll be able to take them down. And so what I have, you look at what the Chinese have done, is that it's exactly that. They have followed that same idea of we want to gain in the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to get all these economic connections into Asia, Africa, Latin America, and just recently, early September, the Chinese hosted there's an organization that they set up called the Forum on Chinese-African Cooperation, and that consists of all these African states, and China has a lot of economic and political relationships. And you can say, if you think of various instruments of national power. I don't know, at Fort Leavenworth we always talked about, you know, political, economic, informational, and military as 4 instruments of national power. The Chinese, in a sense, you could say, are almost dealing with all 4 in all of these areas, but they're primarily, I think, focused on using the economic instrument. But then, of course, with economic penetration, you also get political influence, and then with the informational phase, they're trying to set up, you know, Chinese ties with all the educational institutions. They even bring mayors of cities to China on little 2-week, like excursions where they're going to meet with mayors in China, and then they can say, well, this is how we do things in China. This is what you can do in Africa. So, I mean, they're working, let's say, what do we call it? A whole government approach, you know, to try and gain influence. And this forum on Chinese-African cooperation. They had 28 heads of state from Africa and their wives in Beijing last month, you know, giving them the royal treatment. And I don't know what the level of representation from the 28 countries that weren't there was, but I'm sure they're also fairly high. And so they're spending a lot of money. This Belt and Road Initiative, investing a lot of money, and what are they gaining out of it? Even if they didn't make money with these investments, they're gaining influence, and they're gaining votes in the UN. One of the things, you know, that the Chinese are very concerned about is we want to gain influence in international organizations. And how do we do that? You got to have the votes. So China, I think there are, was it 55, 56 countries in Africa? Think of how many votes the Chinese can get in the UN General Assembly because of their activity in Africa. It's a big help to them. And it's the same idea of we use let's say the countryside of the world to gain influence and maybe eventual control over the cities of the world, and they're doing it. You know, attack weakness, you know, avoid strength. So here we are with Japan. We're trying to strengthen our ties over there. We've got, 22 ships stationed in Japan. We're increasing our cooperation with the Japanese Self-Defense Force, building new command structures where it's almost like a unified command now with Japan forces and U.S. forces. We're trying to get the Japanese to build more Patriot missiles so we can buy. So yeah, and they're talking about more ship maintenance being done in Japan because it's too hard, I guess, for us, because we don't have the shipyard capacity we had, plus, transit times and everything, and we're also, you might have picked up, Korea. We're relying on Korea now to build more ships. A Korean company has bought the Philadelphia shipyard, and Secretary of the Navy was over in Korea and amazed at how their shipbuilding system is so efficient that they can keep track of where they are in a moment of time in the shipbuilding, in building that ship, and they will say it will be done on such a day, and it will be done on that day. We've got, I was reading something like our submarine program. We're having a new ballistic missile submarine program. Columbia it's going to be the Columbia class, first ship named Columbia. They are right now 12 to 16 months behind schedule and way over cost, hundreds of millions over cost. I think now, 8.2 billion, to finish this submarine, and the plan is to have 12 of these with a total cost of 130 billion, which gets into another issue that you think about how many resources does the U.S. have to put into its defense budget is that our defense budget, I think, for this year over last year, it went up 0.9%. 0.9% actually ends up, because of the rate of inflation, it's a decrease of about 2% or more. I mean, we've got problems and we're not addressing them. I mean, that's kind of an issue. And if we get to Taiwan, I've talked, oh gosh, it's quite a lengthy talk here, I'm sorry. But, you know, just mention a few things about Taiwan, because you've got a handout with Taiwan. This, yeah, this one. And you can, and so again, we get back to this idea that, you know, Swins is talking about the energy in a situation, and we think about, you know, when we say like which way is the wind blowing, we're kind of talking about there's something out there that some energy in a situation. And which way is that energy flowing? Is it moving in a positive direction? Is the tendency positive for us, or is it negative? For the Chinese, they're thinking everything is positive. So, you know, basically, the leadership believes the U.S. is structurally broke and that we're on an inevitable decline, while they are on an inevitable rise because of, they look at, well, look at how fast we've moved to go from where we were in 1970 or 1980 to where we are today. My gosh, our military, we've got, and like with their Coast Guard building program, they have quadrupled the number of Coast Guard ships with 1,000 tons or more in the last decade. That, which gets to the whole point of their shipbuilding capacity being more like more than 200 times what ours is. I mean, so we've got infrastructure problems. The whole foundation of our defense industry is challenged. I was reading, you know, they have the Virginia class submarine program, you know, the attack submarines, and we need to be producing like 2 point something of these submarines per year on average in order to keep our attack submarine fleet up to what is, you know, what we need. We are now below 1, you know, on replacement per year, and the cost has gone up, and we've got problems with finding labor. You know, where are the workers, the skilled workers we need, and you know, well, and even then, once you build the fleet, where are you going to get the sailors to man the fleet? I mean, we're having recruitment issues, right? Isn't that, you know, you read about that. So, so we've got, you know, all of these, you know, problems, yes.
Gary, you know, we're mentioning so much of the ascendance of the Chinese.
Yes.
Aren't the Chinese government, you know, the Communist Party, also concerned about growing discontentment of the population because of the financial issues, you know, they're faced with? And, you know, my concern is how does that impact the decisions that they may want to take to distract from that?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so people will say, okay, don't worry about China. China's not 10 feet tall, or the Chinese aren't 10 feet tall. They've got a lot of problems. You can say, okay, recently now their population has actually started to decline. So what are the economic challenges there? They've got issues with you know, environmental, you know, degradation and the general economy, and things like movement of capital. Why were they able to rise so rapidly from 1980 to now? Most of that, I think, was due to the hundreds of billions of dollars that was taken out of the U.S. economy by our corporations and our large banks and shipped to China to build factories in China that are now producing the equipment or the material that they're selling back in this country. And so I think it was 2023, we imported like $540 billion worth of goods from China. You know, 540 billion, that's a lot of money going their way, and they can look at that. And the idea of dissent, there was a lot of problems with this COVID in China. First they blocked they said, okay, nobody can come in, we're going to just put up walls and we'll keep COVID out, even though there's evidence maybe it came from China. But then this Omicron version of the virus came in, and so I think it was 2022, was it, that China got hit with that version, and there was such a large number of people, especially the elderly, it's estimated at least 1 million people just in a very short time died. And so they had all these lockdowns. They were closing buildings. They were setting up fences around blocks. If somebody tested for COVID, they put up a big fence. You couldn't get in or out. People were dying because they couldn't get to the hospital for their doctor's appointment. And a lot of discontent, And so the government all of a sudden, whoosh, open. No fences, no nothing. We're not going to control people like that. But there's a fear. Such a fear of discontent growing that forced the government to backtrack on their anti-COVID policy. But like right now, what are they doing? Maybe you might have seen where there's like what is it? 6-7 weeks ago, the young Japanese boy, 10 years old, going to school in South China, and he was stabbed to death by some Chinese guy, and his mother's taking him to school. He gets stabbed to death. A couple months before that, there was another attack on a Japanese mother and child up in the city west of Shanghai, and a Chinese woman who tried to protect them was stabbed to death. And a little bit before that, in May, there were 4 professors from Cornell University in Iowa Cornell University. Why did you have these 4 professors from Cornell University over there? It was because this one Chinese university invited them over to teach computer science, mathematics, and physics. Oh, what do you know? The Chinese are trying to improve their, teaching of computer science, mathematics, and physics. Why? That's a national defense, benefit. But anyway, so here you got the 4 Iowa professors. They're out walking in this park. They were all stabbed. None of them died, but anyway, you look at this, what's happening, and the Chinese government, in order to build support for itself, has been pushing nationalism and anti-foreign attitudes, and especially anti-Japanese attitudes. So even though you have a 10-year-old boy stabbed to death, the Chinese internet is full of people saying, kick all those Japanese out. We don't want any Japanese schools. They're all spies. And they've done all these bad things during the Second World War. Well, that's again a symptom or a result of the Chinese government for years from building museums to get the Chinese people to believe that the Chinese Communist Party is defending China and the Japanese were so evil, and if it weren't for the Communist Party, the Japanese might still be here. And the anti-foreign things. And now some of it's becoming anti-American, and they're trying to deal with this potential disconnect or actual disconnect or discontent by pushing anti-foreign attitudes and the hatred of the foreigners and promoting nationalism, and it's not going to end well, I don't think. Yeah, so I mean there are problems, but the government, they put in these cameras on every street corner, and I remember there was one, some years ago, that a reporter from some, Western media was in there, and he was talking about how someone in the Chinese, government was saying, "I dare you, I don't think you can possibly get out of surveillance." And then the guy had to admit, yes, I could not escape surveillance, because everywhere he went, on the street or wherever, the restaurants, wherever, there was a camera. And somewhere, that facial recognition stuff now you got with computer systems, they were able to, keep track of where he was. So, I mean, China's got problems, but the government is trying to keep a tight lid on things with all this surveillance and control, plus the propaganda to make people suspicious of everybody who isn't, Chinese. Yes.
I flew for Northwest Airlines, 9/11, I was in China.
Yeah.
And we had Chinese flight attendants. And after 9/11, I was very surprised by one of the Chinese flight attendants who basically applauded the fact that the towers came down and really was anti-American, even though she was a Northwest Airlines flight attendant. And I can go into that story, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, after talking to her and discussing things with her about history of World War II, she had no clue about U.S. and China in World War II.
Yeah.
It was all the Communist Party that had defeated the Japanese.
Yeah.
As far as she was concerned. I mean, that's what she was taught.
Yeah. Well, that's where the Chinese control of information. The Chinese government controls information, so they have rewritten history or written out the history of so much that was bad for them. And that's another thing that Xi Jinping has pushed, is don't tell bad stories about the Communist Party in China. Only tell the good stories, which I think are pretty hard to find. But anyway, he's saying they're there. Yeah.
I have two quick questions, well, maybe not real quick, but after all we did for China in World War II, going back to the raid of Nanking and then Chennault with the Flying Tiger.
Right.
They helped with the Doolittle raid. They helped with the early B-29 raids on Japan. Where did we go wrong in our relationship with China? How much of it is our fault? Where did we go wrong? And the second question I have is, how good is their anti-satellite technology right now? Could they knock all our satellites down? Chinese.
Maybe you got the answer to that.
Short answer, yes. Most Russia, us, and China now have missile systems that you can use to take out satellites. The concern is if you use a traditional munitions against a satellite system, what happens is fragments in space will be launched in a million different directions at hyperspeed, which means you can't maneuver all the other satellites in 3 fields to get out of the way, which means you use a traditional munition to hit a satellite, you're more likely than not going to destroy your own satellites or other satellites in the regions of the space because of just that sense of breathing and zero gravity environment will react. Now, you can use satellite jamming technologies, which we have started to work with, and most countries have started to develop with, in order to intercept things like that. If you want to use certain laser systems to fly at a satellite to intercept its ability to collect satellite imagery, you could do that. However, it comes down to a money piece of priority. The United States, with satellite imagery collection, we contract out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the other National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. They buy imagery from not only civilian side of the house, but we also have our own self-made side of the house, whether it's military satellites, CIA satellites, NASA satellites. They all work together in tandem with civilian counterparts to map the world almost every single day in terms of imagery and communications. So we are have the access and ability to, hey, if a civilian space company has imagery we want to get access to, we just go to the company and say, hey, we want to buy this imagery from you, and we have access to it. Because, for all intents and purposes, civilian commercial satellites are doing projects for engineering companies or other purposes they sell imagery to. Same thing with communication satellites. We work in tandem in space for those communication satellites. The Chinese want to intercept, there is capabilities in these to intercept or jam or degrade satellite capability.
Yeah. Yeah, so are you,
The other question is that,
oh, where did we go wrong? Well, as a lot of people, you know, I guess could say, is that China had its own course of development, and if you say, well, who lost China? Who, you know, we didn't lose it because we never had it. I mean, what the relationship we had with the nationalists was Chiang Kai-shek, you can say, I mean, he was just one of a number of warlords in the 1920s and 30s who came to be the top dog over there. But even during the Second World War, he was still afraid of other generals who had control of their own regions. And so that's one reason why Stilwell, you know, our General Stilwell over there, was so upset with how the Chinese were fighting the Japanese. They weren't fighting, they didn't put as much effort into fighting the Japanese as they did to either fighting them, you know, arguing within themselves or preparing to fight after the Japanese were defeated. So right after the Second World War ends, you got Chiang Kai-shek. He's going to have to fight other people, and the group led by Mao, the Chinese Communists, turned out to be the most powerful, and they ended up kicking him out. And then he went to Taiwan, and just a couple things about Taiwan is that the nationalists got, you can say that the U.S. agreed with Chiang Kai-shek, gave him permission after the Japanese are defeated, you can send your army to Taiwan to accept the Japanese surrender. Just like we told the nationalists, okay, you're the closest to Indochina. When the war's over, you can send nationalist troops in northern Vietnam to accept the Japanese surrender. So the nationalist army gets into Taiwan, and at that point, Taiwan had been part of Japan for 50 years, since 1895, because the Japanese won the Sino-Japanese War of 1895. They acquired rights to Taiwan. So I mean, if I had been born at my age in Taiwan, right, I would have been born Japanese. And there are still a lot of Taiwanese then of my age, and maybe the ages of some other friends here, that you would have been born Japanese. I remember one of my students at CGSE, Taiwanese officer, he would talk about how his grandfather would sometimes talk about the good old days when Taiwan was part of Japan. That the economy was going along, things were peaceful, you know, whatever. So when you think about Taiwan right now, when the nationalists came over, these nationalist troops are like, whoa, I've never seen things so good, because Taiwan had economically developed, so it's up here closer to Japan, while most of China was still way down here. And so a lot of corruption, a lot of bad things happened when the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek moved to Taiwan. 1947, February 28th, you get the Taiwanese who are upset with all this corruption and things, you get a big demonstrations. The nationalist military then clamps down on them, kills at least 18,000, and I don't know how many ended up arrested. But that day is in infamy in Taiwan now for those people who weren't the ones who had fled from China. Because you had like a couple million people then with the nationalist army, they fled to Taiwan. They became the rulers of Taiwan, and then martial law under nationalist control up until I think it was 1985. Taiwan really didn't become a democracy until the 1980s, or maybe you could say the 1990s. So Taiwan, you know, when we think about, you know, some of you might remember a representative named Pat Schroeder. Yeah, Pat Schroeder. She was instrumental in having the Taiwan Relations Act passed back in 1979 after President Carter had decided to end our relationship with Taiwan and establish diplomatic relations with China. So Pat Schroeder, Senator John Glenn, and others said, wait a minute. If we do what you want to do, President Carter, that's like throwing Taiwan under the bus. So we're going to have a Taiwan Relations Act, which is going to say, yes, we're not going to have a treaty obligation to defend Taiwan, but we're going to have a legal obligation. It's the law. The Taiwan Relations Act obligates the U.S. to provide Taiwan with military weapons, equipment, and services to provide their self-defense. Plus, it obligates the U.S. to maintain a military force capable of deterring China from attacking Taiwan. Because it says in there that diplomatic relations with China are established with the understanding that the People's Republic will not use military force to settle the dispute between China and Taiwan. So we've got not exactly treaty obligations there. We do have clear treaty obligations to defend Japanese territory and Philippine territory now. With Taiwan, it's the Taiwan Relations Act, and then you've had President Biden asked a few times, would you defend Taiwan? Would you use military force? Now, 4 times he said yes. Now, then the White House commentary was, well, maybe, well, they would say what? We have not changed our one China policy. But what is the one China policy that they talk about? The one China policy is we acknowledge, and this goes back to 1972 when Nixon is over there. You've got a Shanghai communique. Nixon tells or signs this communique. The U.S. acknowledges that the Chi-Coms say Taiwan belongs to them. All we did was acknowledge the PRC position. We didn't agree with it. There's no agreement by the U.S. that Taiwan belongs to the PRC. And in fact, with the peace treaty we signed with Japan back in '52, I think it was, Taiwan had been part of Japan. So the peace treaty with Japan has to deal with what happened to Japanese territory. And in that peace treaty, let's say the references to Taiwan are, it will be dealt with sometime in the future. Okay, so just to look at this one handout here, when we're talking about the Chinese are on the uptick, things are going their way. If you look at this, who am I? Whose side is time on? And you look at this and you can see when people are asked in a public opinion survey, do you consider yourselves Taiwanese or what? And the answer is that the number of people who consider themselves Taiwanese is going way up. The number of people who answer Chinese is going way down. And then you've got some here, this is the people who say, I'm Chinese Taiwanese, which is like, you know, like me. What am I? You know, am I Norwegian American or am I a German American or whatever? But primarily, you know, the emphasis is on the American part. So you got, right now I think it's down, the latest that I had the statistics on here, 2.4% would say I'm Chinese. But the Chinese PRC is saying, Taiwan, all the people in Taiwan want to be part of us, you know, and come under our rule. So time is moving against the PRC in this. Yeah, so, yeah, that's, yeah.
Just to summarize.
Yes, to summarize. Yeah, I will summarize, yeah, yeah.
Well, what I can close out with you, Joe,
Yes.
is what, from your vast knowledge of this, what is your advice to the next incoming administration in terms of how to handle the issue with China and what you see the biggest threats to us?
Okay, so we've got two potentials. We got 2 possibilities, right? We got a President Harris or a President Trump. And all I can say is, no matter which of those comes in, they shouldn't act as an empty suit and just allow the Chinese to continue rolling over things. That there has to be, you know, some clear statements, and certainly we have to increase our defense budget because the Chinese are only going to pay attention to what we're saying if they believe that we represent strength, not weakness. If we have substance, not nothing, not emptiness. And so, but that's going to be a real challenge for both of them. Yeah.
Does it help to have a vice president that speaks Chinese?
I mean, yeah, I'd like to think that the Chinese would. I mean, okay, are the Chinese going to be impressed by someone from America that speaks Chinese? No. I mean, yeah. Oh, they may say, "Wow, oh, isn't that nice? Oh, you can speak Chinese, blah blah blah." But as far as changing their attitudes and saying, "Oh yeah, you speak Chinese. Gosh, I guess I really do love America." No. As far as the relationship, I don't think it's going to matter whether you speak Chinese or not, because we've had diplomats over there, for years who are speaking Chinese, and we're further apart now than we've been in a long, long time.
So we get stronger to what end? What do you think we'd be willing to do? Sink their Coast Guard ships? Put more pressure on to get them out of the straits?
Continue support to Taiwan, big time. And, let them know if they tried to tack across the straits, it's not going to be an easy thing. But I think
we already have
the biggest
that
threat
trade.
is financial.
Well, we've got, yeah, I mean, the Taiwan Relations Act already provides, weapons and services and so on. And now, you might have seen, actually, we've got, I guess, special forces and other people, other military people in Taiwan as part of the idea of providing services, defense services to Taiwan, training the Taiwanese there. I saw something that some SEAL unit out in Virginia had Taiwanese SEALs training with them so they could be more proficient and things like that. So, and also, a couple years ago, well, I guess it's last year, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, there was a Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act that was part of the National Defense Authorization Act. And the training in there is to promote training of the Taiwanese to increase their interoperability with U.S. forces. So, I mean, we're doing a lot of things that would make the Chinese think, whoa, we don't know what would happen if we attack Taiwan, because we're not sure what the Americans will do. And so they call that strategic ambiguity. Keep them guessing about our intentions. But now you've got a lot of people saying we need strategic clarity, and the benefit is let them know that if they attack, we will help Taiwan defend itself. I think I'd almost come down now on the side of it should be made very clear that if they attack, because that would be a violation of our understanding when we establish diplomatic relations, that you have to, if you want to join up with Taiwan, it's got to be done peacefully and with mutual agreement. And if we say that's a violation of that, we're going to fight, I think we'd be standing on strong moral ground.
Well, Don,
Yeah.
just as a final comment.
I want to say thanks, Gary, and I want to say I think you've spoken longer with tolerance than anybody I've ever seen here, but I know there's a lot of people who still have questions, and I think you'd be willing to wait a few minutes, but more importantly, you're not done yet in Colorado, and Tom is the president of the Naval Officer chapter of MOA. Tom, could you mention next week's meeting to folks and invite them and tell them we need to know if they're coming?
Yeah, Gary is going to speak again next week at our chapter meeting, which is at Atonement Lutheran Church in Boulder. It starts at 9 a.m. And
You get breakfast too.
yeah, okay, Saturday, a week from today. And you're all welcome to come. We do need an approximate head count, so let Don or me know so that we've got the right amount of food prepared.
Or you can pass it on to me and I can get it to them.
Mike's a member of the chapter too, so you can get it to me too.
Yeah, so thank you for your attention and the questions, and I'll just stand up here if anybody wants to, talk anymore or ask anything. Here I am. Okay, thank you.
Mike,
Yeah.
if you wanted our challenge.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, okay.
So
Great.
please, come, lots of questions.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems to me, what you pointed out, with the trade deficit, as long as we're wanting cheap TVs and cheap products,
Yeah.
we're helping to fund all that.
Yeah.
But it's in a capitalist system.
Well, and you,
The impetus to the people with money is to make profit on your investments.
well,